Hey everybody, good afternoon. Welcome to today's virtual plant clinic. I'm going to go through our introductory notes pretty fast because I know pruning is a big topic. For those of you who are joining us for the first time today, welcome. And to those of you who attend regularly, as always, welcome back. If you have questions during today's class, please feel free to send them to the Q&A. You can just click the Q&A button, type your question in, and I will be relaying those to David. Just as a quick warning, pruning is a big topic. David and I were just talking before we started the class, and we may be taking a few less questions than usual today just because we want to make sure that David's able to cover all of the material. As always, you can follow up with us after the class if you're not able to have your question asked. We are recording today, and so you can access the recording tomorrow on our YouTube channel. And if anybody has any issues, please let me know. I'm opening up the chat now. And the last note from me is David has provided the tree and shrub pruning chart, which is a really useful resource. I'm going to send a link to the chat, but I know some people have difficulty accessing documents from there. We'll send a follow-up email tomorrow, which we don't usually do for the virtual plant clinics, but we'll send a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to this document for everybody, so you can access it then if you have any trouble today. And that's it from me, David. I'll let you get started so you can get through everything.
Thanks, and good afternoon, everybody. I appreciate you joining me today. Pruning is a fun topic. It's something that always generates a lot of interest, and I always enjoy teaching it. What you're getting today is actually, I taught a pruning seminar here at the Garden Center last Saturday. The class went on for about an hour, and then there was question and answer, and I was there for 2 hours. But now I'm going to cram all this into 60 minutes. So we're going to just get right to it. And like I said, please, we will leave opportunity for questions. So put those in the chat box and we will allow some time to get through all this great material. Just kind of kick things off, I want to be clear that I'm talking about pruning ornamental trees and shrubs that you can reach from the ground without having to get up on a ladder. This is sort of my limitation. If this requires you to go up on a ladder, that's a little outside the scope of this class. And if you're even thinking about climbing a tree, that is way outside the scope. At that point, I feel like you really should be calling a professional arborist, somebody that's actually trained and has the equipment and the experience and knowledge to do this work safely. And I think most of us are kind of in that category anyway. So, I'm talking about ornamental trees and shrubs, the things that really lend themselves to do-it-yourself type of pruning and that you can safely reach from this ground. So I'd like to always start out by saying we begin by setting our goals and our objectives. Why are we pruning? Plants don't actually require us to go out there and prune them. We're not necessarily doing this for the plant. We're doing this for ourselves. We're doing it for our benefit. And I see a lot of really bad, awful pruning out there, and I question, why are we doing this? Why is this happening? And sometimes I think it's just like out of rote habit that people are going out there and trimming and pruning stuff. So you really, before you pick up a saw or clippers, you really need to think, what's the goal here? What's the purpose of that? And most commonly, most of the time that I'm working with customers on this, it's to reduce the size. It's because plants have outgrown the space that we provided for them. And that really goes back to proper plant selection and looking at plants over a longer period of time. When I'm talking with customers and people, maybe you at the garden center, a lot of times they're saying, oh, well, I'm looking at over the next 3 to 5 years or something. And I'm always trying to say, well, let's look in terms of plant size. Let's maybe stretch it out and say, look, where are we going to be in the next 10 to 20 years or something? So we really want to begin ideally by choosing plants that fit that location and size to minimize the pruning that's required for them. But in real life, we inherit plants that maybe were there from the previous owner. The plant got much larger than the tag said. We ended up staying in that house longer. We thought there's 1,000 reasons why that doesn't always happen. And now we need to go in and reduce the size. Again, I would prefer, and in the ideal world, most of our plants are better off if we're pruning to maintain their size. One is if they get big and overgrown and need to reduce them. And the better situation is if I'm doing this on a regular basis and maintaining the size of the plant. I'm going to have examples of all these as we go through the pictures here. We'll be pruning to shape them. Sometimes our pruning is done to improve the flowering. Sometimes it might be a matter of improving the health of the plant. We might have a diseased branch that's got a canker in it, or it might have a crack or a break, or it's rubbing, some kind of structural pruning where we're going in and doing this really with the intent of trying to improve the health or prevent problems down the road with that. I also like to take a look at the plants, make sure, like I say, I've got those clear goals and objectives set. But it's nice to do this in the winter time. So right now, anywhere from about today to maybe April 1 is a really nice window for pruning. We like to do this when our trees and shrubs are completely dormant, when they've shed all their leaves and we don't have any sap flowing, there's no insect activity in there. We can see the structure and branching better. So this is something that I like to do kind of in a January, February, maybe into March time period. But the weather has been so awful, I haven't started anything because I don't have to tell you, it seems like it got really cold in December, and it just has not been nice weather to go outside and work. It'll feel like for the past 8 weeks. But we're getting to that point now where hopefully you'll get a nice day, a dry day, a snow-free day that you're ready, the cabin fever's there and you're ready to get outside, or release some of that energy. And pruning is so rewarding because it's something you go in and you get immediate gratification. Get a little bit of exercise, spend some time outdoors, and then you get that gratification of seeing the results show up immediately. So this is stuff that you can get started on pretty much today if you have the inspiration to do it and the rain holds off. So I've kind of grouped this or set this presentation up in terms of different pruning techniques. And what I'll be doing is kind of go through the easiest stuff first, and then we're going to build on that and kind of get more complex as we go through the different examples. So a renewal pruning. This is probably the most severe situation you would face. This is oftentimes a plant that's just way overgrown, gotten too big. We're faced with a choice like either I'm going to, cut this down severely, rejuvenate it, and kind of start over, or I'm just going to remove the plant. And we're in that kind of situation most of the case. So this renewal pruning is typically applied to very vigorous growers that have gotten too large, and I'm going to bring it down in size drastically and then allow it to regenerate. So what they're trying to show in this diagram is this was obviously cut back severely. All these dormant buds are resprouting, and then we're thinning out the weakest and thinnest of those and trying to restore structure to the plant. So examples of this. This is Burford holly. This down the campus of American University. These were mature plants. There's a Burford holly grouping that had grown up to a height. They were probably about 8 feet tall, 8 feet wide when this started. So this was just a solid, dense mass of Burford hollies. It was obstructing the view, obstructing sunlight. The plants have really, over the years, probably the decades, had just outgrown the area that they existed. So in late winter, early spring, they went back, and you can see the extent that these were cut back. So they were cut back from about, like I said, 8 feet tall down to 1 foot tall. And then you see how much they're regenerating and coming back from that. So hollies are generally a good plant for this purpose. They will respond well to that type of pruning. And then over the period of the next 2-3 years, they'll be shaping, thinning, and getting these plants restored back into the full good health that they originated from. This is a rose bush. This would be an example of another plant that's very vigorous. Roses can grow 1, 2, 3 feet a year in good health and in good conditions. In this case, we're going to go in and prune the plant to rejuvenate it, restore vigor. But with roses, we're also doing this with the intention of boosting the flowering on this. So here what we're doing is If we cut it back to fewer stems, healthier stems, retaining the thick fat stems, that's going to give us the larger, more vibrant roses that are on there. So this would be an example of a plant that through this annual renewal pruning or rejuvenation pruning, we can increase the flowering that's on there. So again, there would be different reasons for this. We'll do this sometimes on buddleia, the butterfly bush. You might do this on a red twig dogwood because you want the juvenile growth that has the bright red coloration in it. So there's some plants where we'll do this as a common practice to get a specific result that's back. I'm putting my plug in here, Pam Powers with Arlington Rose Foundation. She's going to do a class in much greater detail. I'm just putting that out as a tease and some good example of renewal pruning. But if you can attend this webinar there on Thursday, March 5th, Pam will go through this in much greater detail than I'm going to take time today. And I encourage you to do that because she's going to show you how you can do this rejuvenation pruning, both to improve the health and productivity of your roses. So another plant that can respond really well to this, that I get tons of questions and inquiries about, is crepe myrtle. A lot of people grow crepe myrtle, extremely popular plant because you get basically any height, shape, size, color, the beautiful, colorful bright blooms in the summer, nice fall coloration, good branch structure, and a really durable plant for a lot of different environmental conditions. They're great in full sun. But there's a lot of debate and confusion about how to prune them. And I'll tell you right now, I don't feel like there's any one way of doing this. As I've made really clear already, most of the time, we are pruning to suit our needs, our interests as gardeners. We're pruning it to reduce the size, boost the flowering. It's really not the plant. It's not what the plant needs or wants. It's kind of what do you need or want out of the plant. So crepe myrtle, if you look at this picture, you can see where I'm taking my little cursor right here, probably at about, maybe 18, 24 inches off ground level. You see right there through here, these plants at one time, somebody came in and did this rejuvenation type pruning. I can see by looking at, you can see by looking, somebody came by and chopped them off right through here at about knee height. Now, when we do that, there are dormant buds up and down this stem. So there's buds that you can't even see them, but they're there, they exist. And we remove that top growth out of it, these dormant buds suddenly sprout and regenerate the new growth that we start seeing there. So with crepe myrtle, some people will go in there and do this on an annual basis. They'll do it each winter. Sometimes that might just be done once every 5 years or 10 years, or just on, sort of an as needed basis. So these are the same plants, just looking at them during the growing season. And a lot of people might go by and condemn and say, oh, this is horrible. This, you're butchering the plant or you're destroying its form. There would be a lot of criticism that goes on. But my opinion on it really is, in this situation for this application, I think it works really well. It's a commercial entrance. They're trying to get that uniform look that's down there. The plant grows back, it's bursting with flowers. It does change the shape, but this is an example for renewal pruning on crepe myrtle. If you are going to be doing this type of pruning, again, now, sometimes I don't want to give you urgency, but sometimes like in the March and crepe myrtles, they don't start growing until you get well into late April. So you've got a few weeks to figure this out. But yeah, this is a great winter project that you can do. Now, you cannot do this on all plants. I keep going back and forth saying, oh yeah, the plants are so tough, they're resilient, cut them back, they'll forgive you, they'll rebound, they'll recover, they'll fill back in. And to a large extent, that's true, but pretty much every single thing I tell you on these programs, there's always going to be exceptions. And one that we really need to be aware of is we cannot do this on conifers, our needled evergreens, or our cone producing plants. If you look at a conifer, in this case, it's just a close-up of a pine, the growth tips, we call them meristem, where the new growth emerges, that's coming from these terminal buds right up here at the tip. If I lose that bud, then these further down the stem, they will not regenerate. They will not renew themselves. This is a image where they're beginning to come out in the very early spring. So if you look on pine, spruce, fir, those kind of plants, what is often called the candle season, when these buds begin to break dormancy, and this is usually late April or May, these begin to extend up all at once. They kind of have this very rapid growth rate. This what Christmas tree growers would call the candle season. They might go in there and shear these. You could go in and I could just cut the tips out, or I could remove them easily. But most of our pruning on this is to maintain the size. And we can do that if we need to by trimming these new shoots, these candles as they emerge. If the plant gets really too big, overgrown, and needs to be cut back, it's not going to fill back in. It's just going to leave a bald spot. The same as sometimes people will go in and raise the lower branches on a conifer. Once you take that branch off, it's not coming back. So you have to be really thoughtful about this. I had a customer in just yesterday asking about topping spruce and cypress trees. And it's like, well, think about it. It's something I don't recommend, because once you cut the top out there, it is permanently changed. It's not growing back. You've lost the form and structure. I'm not saying you can't do it, because either the tree will die. I'm like, no, it's not going to die, but it's never going to look the same. And I don't recommend it, but if that's what you feel like you need to do, just think it through. This juniper is an example. See, if you cut back in the old growth, this always has what I call a crust of green. You might have 3-4 inches of growth on there. But if you cut further back in, all these old mature stems, they will not regrow. That bald spot is there. These green tips that were left surrounding it, new growth will regenerate from there. And so eventually that new growth might sort of cascade down and hide or disguise some of this browning. So this is, within a couple years, 2, maybe 3 years, this damage will be hidden by the surrounding growth. But where these cuts were made, removing all the green tips, that is never filling back in again. So again, it does mean that we need to know our plants. And that's one of the reasons I'm having Sally provide you a link to that handout, because it will give you some tips and guidance on plant by plant recommendations for how to do the pruning. So the next thing I want to talk to you about, and this is going to apply to most of the plants that we talked about today. This is what you're going to be doing most of the time in your garden, what I call selective thinning. So when I use the word thinning, we're actually removing a branch. We're not just cutting it back here at the tip that you can see. I'm going out and I'm thinning it out. I'm removing branches. And what we're trying to see in this diagram is I'm going through here, not cutting the whole plant down like we did in renewal pruning, but I'm cutting some of the weaker branches, some of the branches that might be rubbing and crossing that's in there, trying to open up the canopy, give it a little better form to it. So again, I'm not taking the whole plant down, but I'm thinning it out, trying to maintain a shape and size. So that's the thinning cut, where I'm removing a branch. Sometimes I might refer to a heading cut, which is where I'm removing the tip of that. So back to our crepe myrtle. And I'm using crepe myrtle because it's such a good example of, this is more of a thinning type of pruning. This is a more naturalized look. And I would tell you, just on my choice, my perspectives, I prefer to keep a more natural structure to the plant. So if you look in here, you can see some of these branches have been cut out of there, because crepe myrtle oftentimes has so many branches, so many interior branches. It's just so thick and it's so dense. I think it looks better when I can see that structure and it's thinned out a little bit more. By removing some of those competing growths, I get better air circulation, which may reduce some of the mildew problems. And it also is, again, this thing of trying to maintain the size of the plant so it doesn't get too crazy big on us. But this way, I'm able to maintain a normal kind of look. This is the exact same thing as that crepe myrtle we saw in the earlier example. In the earlier example, I said somebody gone in and done the renewal pruning. The plants are still pretty. They were still living. They were still doing their job. but they have kind of that artificial symmetrical look to them. This is more using what we call natural target pruning or selective thinning, and we're maintaining the natural appearance of the plant. Again, these are your choices. I don't like to use like this is the right way or this is the wrong way. The other is it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. You can combine these different types of cuts, and pruning is in there. This is Natchez crepe myrtle. These grow to be 25, 30 feet tall. Probably the big white ones have this beautiful exfoliating bark and nice form and structure to them. Again, this is another commercial landscape site, but in this case, their entrance feature depended largely on these crepe myrtles for their planting. They had just gotten so large, they gotten so big that they felt like it was detracting from the building or hiding the entrance to it. So this is a little bit of a combination where they went in and they did thin them out. You can see these cuts on the interior where some of those branches were just thinned out in there. Then they went up and they did kind of a renewal pruning in the crown, I might say, or they just kind of did their heading or topping cuts back up in here. So this is, again, it's a combination of these different types of techniques. And here we are in summer. I'm showing you these examples because I want you to feel confident in knowing that, oh, I'm afraid I'm going to mess it up. I don't know what to do. Plants are so forgiving on this. If you mess it up or you're not happy with the results, they're going to grow back and you're going to get another chance at it. So you kind of have to decide and choose where you are. But that's a good example of showing you just how resilient it is. Now it's changed the shape of the plant back to the one where I had that kind of more naturalized look to it, which is what I encourage and I like. But this was done to suit their needs, and it works in this environment. You know, a nice commercial kind of contemporary look at that. I'm going to give you just 1 minute to read this slide where I have a sip of tea. So this is an email I received. I told you I did this class on Saturday, and this is an email I received in return. I was really stumped on this. I didn't feel like I had a good answer to this, and I pondered over because what I was looking at here is thinking like, so this is a euonymus. It's got variegated leaf on there, evergreen plant, and you can see it's the situation here is they feel like it's gotten too large for the area. The plant's in good health. It has nice appearance. There's really no problems with the plant. The only thing is that it looks like there might be 2 of them planted in there, and they've over the years become really too large. I thought it was also interesting as I talked to them, or we were exchanging emails. The homeowners are happy with the plants. They're content to live with it the way they are. And I'm looking at it saying, well, you've been taking really good care of them. They're in good health. They have nice shape, good form to them. The pruning that they've been doing, they do maintenance pruning this time every year. They go in, they do some maintenance pruning. So there's really no problems here other than the problem or the situation that we're presented with is issues with the HOA that wants to see these plants smaller that's in there. So at the end of the day, what I advised them to do was to essentially prune them like this, where they're going to have to do a combination of sort of, it's going to be almost like renewal pruning because they're going to cut back down into the old branches. It's going to fluff out looking more like this. So that the compromise here is they're going to lose some of their naturalized form that's in there, but it's kind of real life. It's what we have to deal with. And that's why I went ahead and put this in here, because it, to me, again, emphasizes when I see these different pruning jobs, when I see different things going on, I don't want to sound like, oh, this is good or this is bad. Sometimes we just have to do things that are not, this has nothing to do with the plant. This is not in the interest of the plant. We're doing this because of what we need in here. And I think it is a partnership between the plants and the gardener. Now, the euonymus, it's a vigorous grower. It will flush out just like the crepe myrtles did. So when they cut the plant back, they're going to have to bring it down, bring it aside. They're going to be exposing a lot of bare woods in there. And then there's those dormant buds. They're going to come back out. They will successfully reduce the size. The plant will recover. It is injuring the plant. We're not doing it for its health or for its betterment. We're doing that so we can get along with our neighbors. Nandina, I put this because sometimes we have multi-stem shrubs. The way that we prune those, again, I go out and do this now, this kind of February, March time period, but we have these multiple stems on here. Nandina is a good example. As it grows, right, they start to get real leggy. They get this very lanky kind of growth, no foliage in there, and it all kind of clusters up here at the top and then starts to flop over. What most people do, because they just don't know what to do, they go in and they start pruning at the top of the plant. If we're on top of the game, we go out and do a maintenance pruning so we don't find ourselves in these situations. Because what I'll do on this Nandina is I will go in at this time of year and prune some of the oldest branches on here. Because as we cut the old branch out, new branches grow up. So I thought this picture, you can see where my cursor is going. So this right now is the thickest, oldest branch. And I don't know if it'll be like this year or next year, maybe this winter. You just kind of have to make a decision, and it's not always easy, but I'm going to go right down to the bottom and cut that oldest stem out. And when I cut that oldest stem out, that encourages and promotes new growth coming up. So here you can see where I've got like an old branch that might be the next one to go. Maybe this one we'll kind of see when I get there. These are what I'm saying kind of intermediate. Those are ones that are now about 3 years old, that have been rejuvenated. And these that are sprouting up are ones that came up from the prior year. So this is the way I'm maintaining it. So I'm constantly, I take some of the oldest stems out, the new ones kind of keep up. And then I also have the intermediate ones because my goal is to keep it under this height of that railing. So again, that's the way we would do a more naturalized look on Nandina or really any other multi-stem plant. Shearing is just, so you can see, shearing is now we're out here making cuts at the tips of the branch, those header cuts, and we're doing this to create these weird shapes out of plants. I don't utilize shearing a lot because, again, I like a more naturalized look to it, but there are times I think when it is appropriate. It's really just strictly for shaping the plant. So these are boxwood down at James Madison's in Montpelier. So very old boxwoods. Look at these two off to the side, right? You can see how old and how big they are. Now, if they were left growing down along this pathway, you would not be able to walk through there, right? Absolutely impossible. So out of necessity, kind of out of function, they have been pruned back, to maintain a size and within the boundaries to keep the walk functional and useful that's in there. Now you can look at the plants and say, well, because of this, they have less foliage, less photosynthesis, they're less productive in terms of food production going on there. You can see little holes and gaps in here. So this is this type of pruning is actually stressful on the plant, but it's something that may be necessary so they can still serve its function, its purpose that's in there. So what I would like to do, if we're, again, on top of our game, many reasons we may not be, is, there's what I'm looking for, is what I call this selective thinning. So this is a boxwood hedge that you can see, and I like this because it's an example when I say thinning, where somebody's gone in and just selectively cut branches out of there. So just almost thinking a little bit like my Nandina, when I open it up, the density, I get sunlight penetrating in there. The plant kind of responds, it regenerates some new growth on the interior. I'm also keeping the size diminished and allowing to keep a more naturalized look going on there. Another example for you where I'm combining different pruning techniques. This is a boxwood, this variety called insularis, or sometimes Korean box, which is a low growing, um, slightly more vigorous growing plant. When you see all these openings and these bald spots there and there, I created those. That's me going in doing the thinning. This boxwood hedge was extending over the sidewalk. And so it was necessary for me to get more aggressive on the pruning in this case. So I went in, I did the thinning, just like you saw on the earlier slide. But when I was done thinning it, I went through and I did a light shearing on there because in this situation, I wanted that uniformity is here to kind of as a landscape feature. And I wanted that kind of more formality in here. So this is thinning and shearing. And this is this spring. Again, you'll see this pulled back from the edge of the sidewalk. The new growth is pushed out, and the plants have come back, and that's exactly what I was hoping for, and I got the good results that's in there. So all of this stuff, it depends what your goals, your objectives are. It depends very much on what plant it is. Like if you do this on English boxwood, they're such slow growers. They don't have the vigor. They don't fill back in as quickly. So I might have to be a little easier on something like an English boxwood. But we have some of these hybrids where they've taken, the English and Koreans and hybridized them together, are really vigorous, and you can be more vigorous and aggressive in your pruning. And so this is fun. It shouldn't be frustrating. It should be a matter of learning and experimenting and expressing your creativity and stuff that's in there. But that's why I sent you that shrub, or Sally put it on there. So if you have questions, I put the most popular landscape shrubs on there, so you can refer back to that and get some idea. Because otherwise, hey, you learn. And one of the things I've learned about not cutting English boxwoods is by making mistakes. If you try to do heavy renewal pruning on them, sometimes they'll come back, but a lot of times they don't. They just don't have the strength and vigor to recover. So I never recommend that unless you're in a willing to lose all situation. I've had people that like, well, I got nothing to lose because I can't keep the plant here. It's either I'm going to cut it back and renew it, give it a chance to survive. If it doesn't survive, you have to be okay with saying, okay, it didn't make it, and I'm just going to now have to make the replacements. So again, no absolutes on this, but that's sort of a thinning and shearing. With flowering shrubs, and I'm going to try and blow through the more complicated stuff that we're getting into now as quickly as I can. Pruning absolutely affects the growth, and it really can have a big impact on the flowering. So this is where knowing our plants is so important. If you look at this as a viburnum, if you went out and this, let's say to me, this is like a Korean spice viburnum. If you went out and looked at this now at this time of year, this is what would look like, right? Totally dormant. But what you'd find is these buds up here, see these tip buds, they're how like 4 times larger than the others. These are flowering buds. The flower buds are generally much larger, more robust than the leaf bud. If I look down here, right, see that's a leaf bud. That's how much difference it is. So if I go out on a viburnum and I do my pruning today, I am cutting flower buds off of there. That's okay, because I told you at the beginning, I prefer doing my pruning in the wintertime because I can see the branching structure. It's easier. But what I'm doing is I'm thinning the plant out. I'm selectively cutting a few branches out of there. I might cut 10% of the branches out there, and I'm going to be happy with the 90% of the flowers that remain. So always we want to look at the plant and try to understand, is this going to be what we call blooms on old growth, which would be this viburnum. These flower buds were formed last year, and then they're going to blossom when we get to April. So that's we're saying old growth. If you look at the crepe myrtle or the rose, that would be an example of flowering on new growth. So there are no flower buds on those. I can cut them back aggressively. They will regenerate new growth, form flower buds, and bloom for me this spring and summer. So that's, we use this word old growth and new growth, which I think is sometimes confusing. So here's Prague viburnum hybrid type that's out there. These were sheared. And what happened is somebody went in and did the shearing. They were trying to maintain the size of them or shape them or whatever the intention was, I'm not sure. But in the process, they went in and you can see how all the flower buds were removed. So if you look at this, I can see maybe 6 blossoms here. It looks like I might have 4 or 5 here. But they took a flowering shrub and removed all the flower buds. What would have been better would be to go in here and do some selective thinning. You can see how many branches there are, develop some more structure on there and a more naturalized look. But the type of pruning I'm talking about, the thinning, that requires more time, more knowledge, therefore more expense. And so you can see this is kind of in a common area. And it's oftentimes people are just not going to pay for what it takes to do a really good natural type pruning job on there. This would be another way of looking. So this is the Judd viburnum without pruning. This is the Judd viburnum with the shearing. So you can understand why I really don't like shearing flowering plants. Azaleas sheared, azaleas thin. Again, most of us know that azaleas, if you went out there today, they have their flower buds. So this is a plant that I would wait, and after they bloom is the time I prune it. So they have flower buds on there. Let's say they open up for me in April, and then I can do my pruning in May. So again, all this, it's don't let it confuse you or baffle you. Just play with it, learn, enjoy, look at your little chart. Now the worst case of all, and then I'm going to take some questions. Worst case scenario is going to be hydrangeas. We sell, I'm going to say roughly about 5 to 6 species of hydrangeas, and then each species has many different cultivars or varieties out there. So there's so many of them. So it's a wonderful group of plants to look at. Examples, and the confusing thing is each one kind of has its own pruning rules. So if trying to kind of make sense of all this, what I'm saying is the smooth hydrangea, Hydrangea arborescens, that's our native hydrangea. And they will have names like Annabelle and Critabelle and Bisbelle. These are different cultivars. That's an example of a hydrangea that grows off of new woods, much like the crepe myrtle or a rose or a buddleia. I can prune those back now in the wintertime. They will regrow and bloom in the same season. Hydrangea paniculata, or sometimes called the PG hydrangea, is an example of a hydrangea that I can prune back in the winter, and then it will grow back and produce flowers for me in spring. So these are super forgiving. These are the easy ones that you really can't go wrong with. You can shape them, size them, however it is that you want to go about. And here's a hydrangea paniculata that was trained into a tree form.
Panicle hydrangea is a wonderful and versatile summer blooming shrub, and winter is the ideal season to prune them. This limelight hydrangea behind me has just outgrown its space, so our goal pruning it today is to bring it down in size. So let me just show you how easy this can be. I like to approach pruning in a 3-step process. Step 1 is my structural pruning, where I'm creating a shape, the main scaffolding branch for the plant. This branch right here is rubbing up against the house. It's also rubbing against another branch, which is creating a wound that can lead to wood decay and breakage. So step 1 will be removing this problematic branch. Limelight hydrangea can be a really big, vigorous growing plant. So my second step in pruning is going to be reducing the height and size. And that's going to be basically as high up as I can reach. Now that I've completed step 2 and reduced the overall size of the plant, it's time for me to move on to step 3. This is where I go in and start trimming some of the small branches and deadheading to give it a nice uniform shape. We're finished with our pruning here. We corrected the structural defects. We reduced the size and shaped it up. And now we just wait for the summer for all the beautiful flowers to return.
So with that, you saw I was pruning some larger branches on there. I feel like I want to say, if you are pruning ornamental trees or taking large branches out of the shrubs, there's a right and a wrong way to do this. When you look at, I'm guessing this looks like a maple tree. If you look up close, there's a little swollen area. There's a little place right in here. You can see where it gets a little bit wider than the rest of the branch. So this is what's called a branch collar right in here. When we are pruning a tree or a plant, when we're taking or removing a branch, we are injuring the plant. Again, no doubt about it. We're cutting a wound, we're cutting or creating an injury. And when the tree or shrub, when that woody plant is injured and that bark is opened up, the inner wood is exposed to wood decay organisms. And there's nothing we can do about that, right? Once that wood decay begins, it's going to progress. The wound dressings, the paints, the sealers, all that stuff is proven to be ineffective in stopping or preventing that. Now, what's happened is plants, they have evolved. They've evolved to shed leaves. They've evolved to shed branches, regrow. They can withstand all that. But this area with this branch collar is where the tree would naturally shed the branch. And it has literally chemical compounds that form and physical barriers that form that block and prevent that wood decay from spreading. So in the old days, if you look back, we might have talked about flush cut. We were actually told and trained to come and cut straight along this trunk to make a nice, smooth trunk. Well, Dr. Shigo, he's a pathologist with the Forest Service, spent his career studying all this. What we found is when we cut into that branch collar, when we injure the branch collar, we have just removed and totally disrupted the plant's ability to isolate and contain decay. And what we learned is that when we're making those cuts, they need to be right outside that branch collar. And when we do that, that wound will successfully close itself. And as shown in this he would injure and wound trees in all kinds of brutal ways and then go back at different times and dissect them to see how they responded inside. And what this little arrow is showing, so this is a little pocket of decay. This branch was removed, the branch collar remained intact, and there's just this little tiny pocket of decay. If we cut too severely in there, that decay will continue to spread throughout the entire tree until you've seen sometimes they collapse, they fall down, and they're hollowed out in there. So a lot of times, if I'm just doing little small twigs and branches, shearing, I'm not concerned about that. But if I'm going in, I'm starting to remove 1 inch, 2 inch diameter branches, then we do want to make sure that we're not creating additional harm. We're trying to make that clean cut right at the branch collar. Couple more. Like I said, we're going to get more and more difficult. So oak leaf hydrangea, climbing hydrangea. These flower off of old wood. So if you went out today in winter, these two hydrangeas, they already have their flower buds. So we probably want to keep our pruning to the minimum, maybe doing a little selective thinning if needed. But for the most part, the less pruning we do, the better flowers we get out. If you, for some reason, need to prune and you need to cut that plant back heavily, the plant will survive, but you just don't get any flowers. You just cut your flower buds off. And what's the kind of point of that? So again, these I might do some pruning in the wintertime, but I'm doing it stingy and I'm doing it that selective flower. Now, one of the things that kind of bothers me is when you start reading about hydrangeas, you'll see this term used all the time when say hydrangeas can't be pruned immediately after flower. That is a true statement, but it's not one that I recommend or like, because if you have an oak leaf hydrangea, they will often flower for us in May. It's kind of peak bloom. But then as that flower matures and ages, the florets around, the sterile flowers, they kind of take on this burgundy, rosy type of hue. They develop a lot of color. I don't want to deprive myself of that. That's half the beauty of the plant. Even on the climbing hydrangea, if you're lucky enough to get the bloom, I enjoy the spent flowers. When we get into the macrophyllus, it's the same thing. They bloom off of the old wood. So if you went out and looked at yours today, you'll see these branches that look scraggly and half dead. But those buds that are on the plant, that's where your flowers will be produced. So again, I want to be stingy. If you go back and you cut the plant back now, the plant survives, but you just took the flowers off of it. And that happens to us pretty frequently that's there. So with the macrophyllus, again, I'm going to tell you the less we do, the better off we are. There's also some that we call, or they were marketed, I think they were sold originally when they were introduced as rebloomers. These will bloom off of both the old growth and some of the new growth. What I found with them is just like all the other hydrangeas, their best flowers come from the old growth. And sometimes you'll get a new shoot that comes up and will flower for you the same summer, but they're usually smaller and much less prolific. So I essentially treat all of these hydrangeas the same way. And the way I prefer to do it is to go in March. So I'm going to wait in March when those buds begin to swell. At that point, I know what's alive. I know what's dead. I can do some selective thinning to cut out the dead branches and maybe a couple crossing, rubbing branches, open it up or something. Maybe just a little bit of sort of deadheading, cutting off the old blooms. But the less I do to them, the more likely I'm going to be to get flowers coming out on there. So these can be frustrating plants because what happens frequently, and it happened to us last year, we had mild weather in March. I think it was even like 70, maybe pushing 80 degrees in March. They started putting out new blooms. And then in April, we had a late freeze, went down to like 19 degrees. So that tender new growth all got frozen out. And while this picture is, I took this off the internet, this is the image that you were sold and the image that you're looking at. And this is what reality provided. So I talk with everybody about hydrangeas. I love the plants. I have one myself because I've been experimenting, learning to live with them and love with them. But I never want to base my whole landscape garden on it like this, or that's just going to lead to disappointment. I'm going to show you one picture and then take questions. This is from 2 years ago, just to put out there and show, hey, we can be successful, but with these macrophyllus, and I love them, and I love the colors in there. It's a fun plant to play with, but we were lucky this year. And this year, we had a continually cool, consistent temperatures in spring that allowed the new growth to come out, that allowed the flowers to bloom, and then with a little bit cooler temperatures, they also persisted for a long time. So it can be done. Some people are more successful than I am with it, but hey, this is part of gardening. You got to take the good and the bad with it and just kind of understand what you're doing. So, well, I'm going to catch my breath and we're going to go back to see if we have any questions.
All right, thanks, David. Everybody, we have about 12 minutes to take questions. If you have any, please submit them. And as always, if we don't get to them, you are welcome to email us or call the store or visit us afterwards, and we'd be happy to help you. All right, first question, David. What is the best time to prune burning bush, and how aggressive can you be?
So burning bush, you want to prune it now while it's dormant, and you can be as aggressive as you want on that. You can prune it essentially to any height, shape, or size, and it will bounce back. Now, I'll give you a couple guidelines of, we might say, hey, ideally, maintenance pruning, we're like only taking maybe 10, 15% of the growth out at any one time. That's a real comfortable number to work with. Sometimes it's gotten overgrown and we need to go in and, let's say, take a third out of the plant. That would be considered a heavy pruning. If you're going and you're taking like 50% out or more, that's kind of what I'm calling this renewal or rejuvenation pruning. When we prune a plant heavily like that, again, energy that the plant has stored in the buds, in the stems, is taken from the plant. It has to regenerate new growth, less leaf surface, less photosynthesis, less energy to kind of get restored and grown back. So it does stress the plant when we do heavy pruning, but if it's a vigorous grower like the burning bush, If I'm not doing this on an annual basis, I'm just like going to go out there and cut it back hard to, rejuvenate it. It's going to come through totally fine with this, but it's not something that you'd want to do on an annual basis. It's kind of something we need to do only when necessary. And like I say, if I could just do a light pruning each year, that's always going to be better for the plant.
Okay. Next question. I have a Hinoki cypress that has grown significantly in the past 20 years. Is it okay to prune it back a bit? At what time of year is best? And we seem to have more browning on the interior than most years. Is this due to the extreme cold?
So Hinoki cypress, just like saying other conifers, you are limited to the pruning you can do. If you look at a Hinoki cypress, this was a Hinoki cypress, right? I've got green growth out here. I might have it going back a few inches, but then I get into where it's just sort of brown branches. I have to leave green tips for it to regenerate or regrow. If I cut further back into here, I've created a bald spot that's not going to fill in. So Hinoki cypress is one that I definitely would prefer and highly recommend we try to do a maintenance pruning on it to manage its size, because if it gets way overgrown and you have to cut it back significantly, sometimes it's just not going to work for you. The time to do that is going to be now, kind of like February, March time period. I would say, because the severity, cold temperature, they'll lose color, they'll go off color, do some bronzing that we talk about it in the wintertime. That's normal, but it was been so cold and it's been such a long winter. Yeah, that's probably just more severe. I would also invite you anytime to bring samples into our plant clinic. We'll take a close look at it. They can get mites or they can get scale, which can lead to similar symptoms in there. So nothing to be anxious about or rush, but also bring a sample in. Let's just take a closer look at it to make sure that we're not overlooking a pest issue.
Okay, thank you. All right, next question. Do you have any tips for pruning Japanese maple? We need to get Michael or maybe Allison on to do a class on this. I need to follow up them. But do you have any tips for Japanese maples?
I think so, particularly like the little weeping Japanese maples are some of my favorites to play with, because they have such architectural interest that's in there. And they look so much better. I think they'll have this profusion of branches, often a lot of crossing and rubbing branches I like to take out of them. The sooner you get started on that, the better. Even as we go into March, the sap starts flowing on that. And sometimes in the industry, there were what we call bleeders. So as that sap starts to flow, you get this excessive sap flowing and dripping. Don't be too concerned if you see that. Eventually it will stop, but that's why I'd rather do it kind of in the middle winter rather than late winter that's in there. But they look delicate, but they respond really well to pruning. Use your imagination. You're kind of going in there, just trying to highlight the looks out of it and do some of that selective thinning. Like we showed in the video, be aware you don't want to injure the branch collars. So make that cuts as close to the branch collar as you can, but without actually injuring it.
Okay. All right, next question. I'm not sure if this is specifically related to pruning or not. You could tell me, David, if this is something that we maybe need to follow up on separately. I had to cut down my beautiful crepe myrtle due to bark scale. Is bark scale an issue going forward in Virginia? And then there's a follow-up about miniature crepe myrtle. Is it spared from bark scale?
So crepe myrtle bark scale, in my opinion, we're all learning together, but it's here to stay. It's not going away. It was a pest that was introduced from Korea, came in, landed down in Texas. It's made its way up the eastern seaboard. The reason we've been seeing it now for the past 3 to 4 years is because it's a new pest. It wasn't really here. I think they have a couple other host plants, but really 99% of it's going to be a crepe myrtle. So they're not going to destroy your landscape. But all crepe myrtles, whether it's the tree form, the shrub form, they're all susceptible to it. I feel like I am already seeing that population decline. And we've seen this in other areas where a new pest comes in, no natural predators, plenty of host plants. 3 years ago, we had this huge explosion in the population. I see now, like we have more ladybugs, like the twice stabbed ladybug. There's another little beneficial pest. It's called mealybug destroyer, but there are predatory insects. And I'm seeing on crepe myrtles the predator prey thing playing out, where now some of the lady beetles, particularly in that group, are becoming really strong predators on that bark scale. So I think they will always be here, but it's not going to be the epidemic type conditions that we've been in for the past 3 years. So there's a little bit light at the end of the tunnel. But yeah, look for it. Look on whether it's a shrub type or a tree form. I think all of our crepe myrtles are kind of equally susceptible to that. And if you went out looking for it now, if those of you may not know, it looks like little white cottony growth, usually along the branches and twigs, but it's almost like a snow white color. So it stands out and you can easily see it. And then we would talk to you about, there's treatments like horticultural oil and other options that we can talk to you about at the clinic.
All right, perfect. Next question. Okay, guys, just warning you all, we probably have more here than we're going to get to today. So I'll send my email out in a chat if anybody wants to follow up. I forward those on to David Yost. I don't try to answer them myself, so no worries there. You'll still get to talk to David. You can also call or come into the store, and we'll keep going now. I have a smoke bush that is, oh wait, yes, I have a smoke bush that's overgrown and needs to be cut back. When can I do this? I'm not familiar with smoke bush.
Oh, wow. That's one of the plants I took out of my slide set out of times. So smoke bush, again, it's a pretty cool plant to work with. It's one that flowers off of old growth. So again, I'd like to prune it when they're dormant now at this time of year, but realize as you are pruning or cutting it back, you are sacrificing blooms. It depends a little bit, like if you have the purple leaf type and it's just, you really want bright foliage. Some people will get real aggressive on the pruning, say the heck to flowers. That will produce a profusion of growth. You get a lot of nice purple foliage on it, but no flowers. I'm usually looking for both. So I would do that selective pruning, kind of almost what I'd say like a natural target pruning. I say more like a crepe myrtle, but I don't want to take the whole plant down or you cut your flowers off. So again, you're free to do what you want with the plant. You're not going to hurt it, but just know the blooms are on there now. So take some of the branches out, reduce its size, do some shaping, but also try to leave some of it untouched so you have some blooms as you go into the summer.
Okay. Let's see here. What do you advise? This is another one I'm not familiar with. What do you advise for mature gold dust?
I was saying gold dust.
Gold dust. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, that's a Cuba. Just trying to make sure we're not talking about gold mops because they're going to be very different answers. Because if it's the gold dust at Cuba, you can prune those as much as you want. Again, you can cut that back by 10, 20, 30%, and boom, it's going to flush back out. No problems on that. Just because they're a little bit susceptible to winter damage, and we're not really quite done with winter, I may hold off just a couple more weeks on that, just in terms of being extra cautious. But again, that's got these dormant, they've got the buds up and down the entire stem, just like you would treat a holly is probably a good example. You can prune that, shape it as you wish, and the plant's going to flush back out and look as pretty as ever this spring.
Okay. All right. This may be our last question. When should you prune suckers? Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, so suckers, I'm glad you brought that up. I like to take those out, just routine maintenance in the wintertime. There's a lot of plants, like I have a Coosa dogwood in my front yard. It produces prolific amount of suckers. These are not, when I say sucker, they're not true branches. They don't have the same structural strength. They don't join to the stem of the plant the same way. These are just adventitious buds that kind of randomly start to sprout. You get this random growth going in here. It feels like, so those suckers, they're less structurally sound. They're basically utilizing energy from the tree. They don't add anything to it. So I like to go through now in the wintertime and remove all of those. They may re-sprout and they may show up again, and you could take them off in the summer, but I really just try to look at this as a winter maintenance thing that's just done every winter.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, it is 3 o'clock, everybody. So, reminder, I will send out a follow-up email tomorrow with the link to access the pruning sheet. You're welcome to follow up to that email with questions or email me, and the recording will be available on our YouTube channel in about 24 hours. David, thank you so much. Do you want to wrap up with anything before we close for the day?
No, just thanks for joining us this afternoon. Hope you keep showing up. I do these every couple of weeks to get a lot of enjoyment out of it, a lot of learning myself, and hope to see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good afternoon. Bye, David.
Bye bye.